Hello and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who loves nothing more than a skeletal bird golem boss.
Tim Longo. Nothing more.
Nothing
Absolutely.
more. Your favorite. Your favorite, I'm sure.
It's my favorite. Man, that boss exemplifies essentially everything about this last session for me.
Yeah.
Just
I would agree.
Yeah.
Also, the Frankenstein boss was kind of tough. There's a real universe of monsters or whatever it's called, Universal's monster
Universal,
universe.
Yeah.
Kind of feel to this game with which should be good for me because wasn't that my suggestions for Pokemon original concepts?
Oh, that's right. That's right. That's perfect. Who knew?
Yeah. So there's we haven't had a Wolfman, but we have had Dracula and of course Death and a Frankenstein and then various other assortments.
Mummy.
But and a mummy. That's true. A mummy.
Yeah.
I should not have forgotten that one. That being the movie that birthed and killed the new Universal Monsters movie. Anyway, we're talking about Super Castlevania IV, if that's not clear. But yeah.
It's just we started talking about it more last episode of just I don't know, I probably was unfairly explaining it as being an unfair difficulty, sort of tuning and balancing and spike. But I feel justified talking about it this episode. Because, not only in the bosses, but in the level design and the platforming, I don't know if it just ramped up for some reason or what happened, but stage 8 and 9 specifically start adding in some of these crazy platforming features with all these new mechanics that you can see why they would go in this direction and why they would start exploring, with some of this new stuff. But man, it just is unbelievable. And I don't know if it's just that I'm getting old or what it is, but I just couldn't imagine somebody playing those stages raw, back in the day, just using codes and passwords and stuff, because the checkpoints are unforgiving, the platforming mechanics are unforgiving, and then the dynamic aspects of the mode 7 stuff that they're starting to really fool with, which we talked a lot about in the previous 2 episodes, adds this layer that just is man.
Yeah, the whole thing is pretty brutal at this point, and I can't really imagine it either. We talked before about how Super Mario World kind of gives you the ability to go and do a level that you're comfortable with and grind coins and get some more lives or whatever. And I've had that happen in other games as well that are very difficult, like there was like a Ghosts and Goblins, I forget what it was called, on PlayStation 2 that was quite difficult. And in a similar way, you'd get to a point where I can revisit these earlier levels. I know where there's one-ups or whatever in them. I'm good enough now to be able to beat that pretty solidly. And here you have none of that. You have just straight linear, go through the whole thing, which might be one of the reasons in the sort of when we were joining the industry, linear had become such a bad word, maybe because of the difficulty spikes and how that might stop you playing. I don't really remember what the origin of that was. I guess it was also about choice and things like that. But yeah, there was definitely a point where I was like, I can't imagine playing this back when you had to do this straight through. No idea. No way I would have been able to beat this game. Even then, even with young hands, I'm leaning on these modern emulation features basically that are built into the SNES Classic. And I got to Dracula and I tried it just a handful of times and went, okay, that's not going to ever happen. I watched a video. It's like, oh no way. Just not going to happen.
Yeah. I haven't watched a video yet, but we both got to the same place, and I can't even see the patterns that I need to figure out. But yeah, and you mentioned it, I think in both of the previous episodes, there's a sort of arcade legacy that seems to be coming with this. And the other thing that I think we bring up from time to time on the podcast is, and I don't want to put all the eggs in this basket, but is the sort of modernization of playtesting in general, and sort of when a developer watches somebody who has never played their game play their game, there's insights that come with that are just invaluable, and it's not, I'm not saying that they didn't play test this game, because they clearly had a goal of having it be difficult. But again, there's something about a game that's coming out in the same era in Super Mario World, where there's a smoothness to that ramp that it felt, in my memory when we played that for the podcast, it just felt more natural. There were definitely hard parts where I was cursing things, but it wasn't. I just, for some reason, don't classify it in the unfair category, and I haven't been able to really put my finger on the whys, other than I think the combinations we've talked about of the character physics / tuning, is pretty clunky / hard to sort of judge, I guess. Mario just always has a different sort of physics to his jump, and arcs to his movement, that somehow is a little more predictable and able to be grokked, and then I think level design, and the sort of the fluidity of how even from moment to moment jumps are constructed. Nintendo has just always been a masterclass in that, and I can't imagine that playtesting isn't a big part of that, even back then for them.
Yeah, and I also think that there's a design aesthetic here of learning through failure, which I don't think is really there with the Super Mario World. Like, I feel like
that's good.
There might be patterns and things, I think, with Super Mario World or any Mario game really, where you may need to sort of do it again and again, just because there's some timing to the jumps that you're trying to do, but you're not really learning through failure. You're just not quite able to execute, right? I mean, I think in theory, you could play a Mario game straight through without ever dying, just by virtue of really understanding the moveset. And I think Castlevania is constantly throwing surprises at you that it doesn't explicitly teach you about, or that it only teaches you about one example. Right before we talked about this with those green spinning platforms, you get one example, and now here's a death chasm, and you can even miss the instruction of the first run. So it's just, that's very challenging, and that's essentially a wall generating design or approach to how you do things. If you have to fail to even understand how a mechanic works, that's going to be problematic. It's going to lead to this.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I think you brought that up before, I think, and I've forgotten. And that is that's a key sort of ethos difference for them. And, Nintendo has always been fairly, I feel like, vocal about the concept that they are sort of essentially making toys, right? That are meant to be fun and kind of positive reinforcement versus negative reinforcement. And the concept of death being, or failure being, the key motivator for learning in games is a constant problem, right? Because it's not easy to always. It's easier, I think, to use death as a way and failure as a way to teach people quickly, And I don't want to say it's like the cop out way, but it definitely drives home that you did something wrong,
Right.
But the second layer for me with this game is, even once you've learned and once you know what you do need to do, that second step, there's a sort of like, there's a learning there and an execution there that also has a layer of unfairness. That I guess to some degree it caught me off guard. I'm still having generally fun with it. That's so there is that, at least. It's just, it's just hard. It's just a
Yeah.
hard game, and it's hard for me to sometimes transport myself back to these times when we're on the podcast playing this stuff, because I think that's been one of the bigger challenges for me on throughout this whole podcast journey, is just trying to, like, my notes. I have a hard time not writing notes down from a critical standpoint, because of the modern era that we're in, and kind of like
Right.
judging it. But it's not really a fair thing to do for games that are, in a different era like this. I can learn from them, of course.
Sure.
Right?
I mean, I think there are fair criticisms to be levied, though. I mean, there's the other thing that I think often impacts the difficulty is that since the frame rate isn't super consistent, which it definitely is in a super, there are places where Mario World will slow down, but it's pretty rare, and it's pretty solidly 30, I guess. But here with the Mode 7 stuff, especially taking up full screens and things like that, and lots of particle effects, there are definitely times where, okay, now it's going 8 as opposed to 20 or 30, and that's a huge difference. And it also means that you can't necessarily even learn the timings well, because it's right, because you're slowed down, and so it's like it's hard to build the muscle memory when the frame rate is inconsistent.
Yeah. Is there, so can you help me on the emulation side? Is it because I just don't know that much about emulation, to be honest, the technical side of it. It is literally emulating what would be happening on the original, right? Is that true?
It is meant to be, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So that
So emulators are meant to be exactly like all the slowdown, everything is the same, because you can't assume that it's going to be that you won't change basically how the game works if you speed it up.
Fool with it, yeah. No, I'm saying like the slowdowns aren't coming from the emulation.
No, I don't think so. No. Machines are so much more powerful now than they were in the early 90s. I mean, we are,
sure, yeah.
We should be at least a factor of 1,000, and I'm sure it's actually more than that.
There'd be
in
no
some
reason
cases
for that to be the case. Yeah, no, and that makes sense. I mean, if there's a scrolling background happening, which I think is some of the Mode 7 stuff, right, where they're working with those layers, and you jump and you whip while you're jumping, it's a guaranteed frame rate drop. I started doing that a little bit in one section, I think in 9, where you didn't really need to do it, but I was kind of trying to be a little more efficient and trying to hit enemies while I was in the air, and just quickly stopped doing that because it just wasn't frame rate feasible. So
the original chip ran it slower than 4 megahertz. So I imagine that even emulating, I mean, normally you say something like a factor of 500 or 1,000 for performance differences, that you need to at least be that much faster, and it gets more complicated with some other factors. But these are all running definitely far ahead of that.
So that would have been the case. I'm sure we could even watch some videos on the original console that would show the same. So, just curious. But there's definitely, I mean, we've talked about it in past episodes, and in this section, I think it continues. There's definitely things to love about the game too, and there is a sort of nice change of pace for me from the Mario. And I think I mentioned this on the podcast when we played the Mario games before. I'm actually not a big Mario fan. And it's obviously I can appreciate the craftsmanship of it and how sort of pure those games are. And I definitely generally enjoy playing them, but it's just not my thing, and Mario specifically. But for whatever reason, as I often have shared, sort of aesthetics and tone, in the MDA side of the sort of mentality of it are definitely important to me. And so I've enjoyed just kind of being in that Universal Monsters, world. Right. And to some degree, it's like we talked about that enemy bar being up all the time, which is just still the wackiest thing to me. And I love it now. that sort of tension of like, what are they going to throw at me next from a boss perspective is just hilarious to me now. And you know, the bone bird is probably going to be going down in my hall of fame of most nerve wracking, terrifying enemies that I didn't see coming. You know, and I actually feel like on the sci-fi side, that's why I think I like Metroid as well. Right, there's a consistent sort of tone to that game as well in the sci-fi side, and they play around and have fun with with their bosses and enemies and things, and it's a consistently holistic. Not that Mario isn't. It's just Mario's just wackier. But so I don't know why. I just that sort of that side of things, the aesthetic side of things, is important to me. So I've enjoyed it for that reason.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I think that I mean, that is great. You do feel, I alluded to D&D previously. You definitely feel sort of that being immersed in this specific location, and it feels of a piece. None of it feels. It sort of feels like, oh, I decided to go in through the side and I fell down and I had to go underneath, and like you can definitely see this as like a mega module or something like that for D&D, like a bunch of different places that you would go, though with more of an action, a lot faster paced, obviously, but and not a lot of sort of puzzling or anything like that.
Yeah,
obviously no encounters, but it's definitely, I mean, no dialogue type encounters. But yeah, it is a fascinating location, and the monster mix is terrific. I mean, the enemy mix is all pretty great, difficulty notwithstanding. I had to look. That was the bird boss was the first one I actually watched a video of to understand how to beat it. And I had people in the chat who were saying, "Oh, you got to do this and this and this or whatever." That's only like a 2-stage boss too. It's not complicated.
Yeah.
But I just was not reading what I was supposed to be doing. I guess it changes like colors and things like that. So that's what's supposed to key you in. The Dracula fight is just
I don't even know where to start. Yeah,
it's I mean, there's like 6 or 7 different stages, and
okay. I haven't even gotten maybe that far then into it.
Well, there's the first thing is he's spitting out these fireballs basically after he appears. And you can actually do I watched a no hit, like somebody who didn't take any damage in that thing, but there's a bunch of different things. After that, he puts this orb up that does a spinning, like fires off projectiles in a spinning pattern, sort of a spiral pattern or whatever around. It sort of spins, I guess, and is kicking out. So you can avoid those, I guess. That actually drops this is the first boss, I think, that Dracula drops pork chops or chicken legs or whatever. It's the first one in the game to do that, which is again just like the the difficulty of like nobody gives you any help. Is that the help is after you complete the challenge, not to complete the challenge. And what else? So then there's like these fire. He appears and summons these fire. So fire shoots up from the ground, and these 2 things appear in the upper half of the screen that descend and come after you. That's, I think, the 3rd stage. Then there's maybe one more stage where he is now the final Dracula form, where he has no skin anymore. He's just a skull with fangs, and he shoots. There's like these 4 or 5 lightning columns that shoot down, and you have to stand in between them. So yeah, it gets pretty brutal.
Yeah, that's not happening.
No, I can't see it. Can't see it happening for me either. I went and actually let myself die. Had a save, so I let myself die so I could come at him with full health, and I was not even getting past the first thing. I mean, there's patterns to do all of this stuff. It's just I'm not sure. It's not a challenge that I feel like I'd feel great overcoming.
Yeah.
I don't feel like I would even take a ton of pleasure in it. So it's just like, okay, I think I've seen enough.
Yeah, it's time to move on. That's fine. We got the gist of it.
Yeah, I mean, which is funny because I think that the bosses in Super Metroid that you mentioned, they're maybe not quite as difficult, but they're often pretty difficult. And there's something about the amount of time you spend going back and forth rather in that area, in that connected world, that I think lends a lot to me caring about finishing it. We're here because I'm not spending a lot of time in the space, really. I mean, I'm spending time in it because of the challenge, but not because I'm getting familiar with it and retracing my steps a ton. I actually think that might contribute to my need to finish a Super Metroid and make me not need to finish this one. Like, I've seen everything. I've got to the final room. What more is there, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's a good, interesting comparison. My memory of playing that for the podcast, I think one thing that I would throw out there is, I think in Metroid's case, because of the Metroidvania side of it, which is still the grand irony of playing this game that we're playing now, there's another sort of there's another layer to the boss battles in Metroid because you are gaining capability and tool sets over the course of the game. And I believe some of those bosses really leveraged some of that stuff where you had to use some of that stuff, right? Like the grapple hook thing or different damage types, I believe, or something like that, right? So there's this sort of, it's not necessarily a combat puzzle, but it was adding in another sort of like, oh, I feel clever because I realized I learned I can use this new tool I have. You know what I mean?
Right.
That I just got from an orb or whatever. And in here, it's literally just raw execution, right? You don't, you may have a secondary item, but you may not. So,
a sub-weapon.
Yeah, a sub-weapon. So here it's just like you said, learn the pattern and, make sure you execute it, well enough to finish it. So that might be one. Yeah,
difference. That's true. I mean, all the things that you're learning in this game are the environment, not your moveset.
Yeah.
Which is true also of Super Mario, because I think with Mario, you have everything you need at the beginning of the game. You can do the whole moveset. So it's kind of similar in that way. And then Metroid more, I guess, borrows from Zelda by adding abilities as you go.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of its distinguishing.
That's why I'm interested in
feature.
Symphony of the Night to see what, how they sort of start employing that same mentality, if it is truly the case, which it sounds like it is, and I hope it is, because
it's funny because I don't remember from playing one of the Game Boy Advance ones. I don't honestly remember how much the character upgrades over time. I don't remember. It'll be interesting because we're kind of tipping our hand here, but we're gonna play that. We're gonna keep going and play some of that so that we can actually get to the Metroidvania part of the series. That would have been, I guess, would that have been the next title? I assume it was the next title. There might have been more on the SNES. I don't know.
I think there,
but in any case, we're going to go to that on the PS1.
Yeah. So, and that's, so that, I mean, we'll get to that when we get to it, but it's just still baffling to me that that's the case. And that it, to be honest, took that long for them to start, using that structure. So yeah, it'll be interesting to talk about that.
The other thing too, I mean, I wonder if there is, and I'm going to use, that phrase you love, grognard capture going on here as well. Like, is Super Castlevania IV, was it made for the fans of 1, 2, and 3 more than anything else? And that can be a really, limiting sort of factor in how approachable it is, right? To people who want to try it out. I would think that would be a bad strategy for new hardware, but what do I know? I mean, maybe people are getting their first console or saying, "Oh, I heard this Castlevania game was really good, on the NES. Maybe I should pick it up." I don't really, I have no visibility into what that kind of consumer purchase decision was like back then. But I wonder if that was part of it as well.
I mean, they're definitely looking. I did at least look at some of because I have that collector's edition. I looked at some of the old, the screenshots of the previous games, and they're definitely seem to be emulating pretty exactly a lot of the at least systems and stuff. And yeah, that could be. It could be. It was a brand, right? It definitely was a big deal, and Konami was a huge deal at that point too, and so I could see them just continuing, right? Contra is another sort of notoriously difficult franchise for them, and that they just also came out with a collector's or anniversary edition of that as well. So it kind of was a little bit of their bread and butter, you could say, to be honest. So, maybe that was just sort of part of what their goals were. We'll never know.
And just what they were known for. And and if you were there looking to buy a game and you saw their name above the title, and maybe you were thinking, oh, okay, that one's going to take me a long while to get through. It's going to give me that challenge that's going to, maybe I'll find really, really satisfying. And maybe that was just your expectation going into those games.
Yeah. I mean, they could have been the Dark Souls of their time, right? In some ways, right? That was kind of like their thing. In both of those franchises. And other than Metal Gear, I feel like I'm forgetting another one that was really like one of their pillars. But anyway, yeah. But there are definitely differences, and that contrast actually might have been really important to their success. That contrast to Mario or from Mario, right? There were very different sort of approaches. And that's why Konami was able to stand out in a pretty rough market. So yeah.
For sure. Let's talk. Yeah, I wanted to make sure we talked because in these levels in particular, there's a couple of different things that there's a sort of the level of platforming goes up. We can talk about that, and then also the ways in which now you have to mix different mechanics together here is something we've lightly touched on, but there's also the sort of combat and the whip and ducking and walking. All that stuff. There's a lot of sort of like, okay, you've been getting better at quick jumping or using the whip, but now how about doing both? Or etc. in this whole section, particularly 8 and 9, I think. But yeah, I mean, what are your thoughts there?
Well, like the first big one that comes to mind that I think we talked about in pre-show. Having the dynamic platforming elements be more prolific throughout these two levels, especially like I feel like they definitely have been slowly ramping up some of this stuff, but in previous stages, I think the way that they would utilize some of that animated stuff and Mode 7 stuff or what have you was sort of almost like set pieces, but here, especially like in the gear section, the whole level has it kind of throughout the whole thing as like the whole level is the set piece in a way. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So there's like for every other jump, you're jumping on almost something dynamic. And that's really ramping up and using some of that stuff versus like the rotating room or whatever from before, whatever level that was just like that one section, And so there's a constant tension because again, as we've talked about a little bit, it's not that he's inconsistent, but there's just something that's a little bit inelegant with the way that he moves and jumps and lands and sort of really being aware of you. I guess I just never found the sort of inherent understanding of sort of his collision box and his pick, where and when to jump at the right moment all the time. And with you add in dynamic gears, especially the ones that are essentially like vertically standing, where you're rotating around them, knowing when to jump off of those things becomes very, very swimmy and hard to know. And so I would constantly slide off of those things because I'm just like, when is he going to fall, and when do I need to jump at the right time, etc. And also weirdly, I started hitting my head on the ceiling more in this section.
Yeah, me too.
and I hadn't had that happen, I feel like, in the past. So there's something else going on there that, and that's not a fun thing, a heroic thing at all.
Yeah.
So
makes you feel like Charles the First of France.
Okay, I'm not getting that one.
We played lawn tennis one afternoon, and on his way back into the castle, he bumped his head on a stone archway and died.
Oh, jeez. Wow. Okay. Yep. Well, he didn't. Well, I was able to hit my head sometimes and survive, but yeah, it's there. It's. I think I mentioned in a previous episode with I think both of them. Some of the substages of each of these were very vertical. I do love those aspects of these two stages specifically, of how vertical they are. And even in A and B, I think it keeps the clock tower specifically, which I think is A. And that's where they start adding in elements, like you mentioned, also with the cross-pollination of things, like even having grapple points being on moving objects. That just really it multiplies the difficulty even more so. So you just go crazy because there's just like all of the stuff is being thrown at you at the same time now, and you intellectually know the difference between each of them, but the execution just crazy again. Couldn't imagine. You just have to practice. That's the thing that I feel like. I don't know what it is about Mario's level design, but I feel like you just get a sense, you have the opportunity and the ability to be able to sort of, and I don't mean literally practicing, but you just have the chance to get the feel for something, and here the only practice you have is to re-checkpoint if we didn't have saves. I couldn't even tell you how many times I've loaded up, reloaded, a save.
I know it was many times. I've gotten to the point where it's so automatic that just like flip my hand over and hit the switch. It really became like silly how much I was leaning on that. Absurd. I want to issue a slight correction. It was Charles VIII.
Oh, okay, good.
Charles the First was, of course, Charlemagne, and he didn't die in such an ignominious way.
Okay.
But it was, in fact, Charles.
You're fact-checking yourself. Good.
I was.
I'm not going to do it.
I don't think that's right. Yeah, I don't think that's right. I was trying to remember. I went to the castle.
As a Frenchman, you got to get that right.
They'll come after me. They have that whole, the people who preserve French culture, as part of the Ministry of Culture or whatever. I don't know.
Oh, shoot.
They'll come after you. The people who watch after the language and all that stuff.
They have a SWAT team coming on your door.
Le SWAT team.
Le SWAT team. That sounds like a great video game. I'm up for it.
Mm-hmm. After SWAT 4, there was Le SWAT. Anyway, that's a little off topic.
We digress. So, well, what about you? What are some of the combinatory aspects of these sections that was surprisingly?
I think for me the hardest stuff was the platforming that involved the stairs.
Right.
I did have the bumping head a lot, but that wasn't as big a deal. But that was more just. You had to learn to like run to the very end extent of those things before you jumped. And if you jumped too early, you're just, that was just kind of, there wasn't a lot to learn there. I guess just, you sort of have to, I guess what you have to imagine in those cases is that you're pushing this hero to his very limits, right? That's sort of meant to be the,
right.
The sort of underlying ethos. But yeah, the stairs that disappeared were particularly daunting because the stairs are very sticky, and it's really easy to accidentally step onto the stairs when you were trying to move. Like it's the same. It's like the same skill they want you to use, that waiting to the last possible moment to jump actually works against you when you're doing that. To jump over a stair, because if you get to the actual stair, now you're stuck to the stair and you can't jump on stairs. And that stuff is just The number of times I died just trying to go and make a jump because I got stuck, on the top step, and then the step disappeared on me, was quite a lot.
Mm-hmm.
That was followed by the section, I think, where there were the rising, which I actually kind of liked and didn't find super challenging, although again it's a sort of learn by dying. Was a section where you had the diagonally moving platforms that were moving from the bottom left of the screen to the top right, and they would drive you into spikes if you didn't if you didn't keep moving to the left and try to get to the left of the screen, which wasn't super challenging once I understood what there were having you do, but but yeah, a lot of learning by failure there as well.
Yeah, that was a nice. That was I definitely appreciated that mix up of sort of level design there, in that there were occasionally times throughout the game where you realized you did need to sort of there was a sort of unintuitive decision to jump downward. But you also know that jumping downward, if the platform has essentially undrawn below the camera, so to speak, that you will die. And so this tension that they built in those rising platforms in that one room, that one section you're talking about, was really cool because, I mean, terrifying and frustrating, of course, but cool because you knew the most efficient thing the platforms are rising up sort of in these sort of layers. And so you think to yourself, oh, I just need to jump horizontally along them, right? But that's not, you can't do that. Well, I wasn't able at least to do that fast enough. So I would jump downward onto the one that's coming up from below the screen, and to give myself more time. But you're kind of taught throughout the game not to do that very much because you'll fall
right
through into the ether. And so it was kind of neat to have that tension of like, okay, I'm going to time it so that one's coming up from below the screen at the right time, and then I land on that one, right? And so that was kind of interesting, where it felt like they were learning about their own world design, and kind of, okay, this is something, we do when we play, or players do and are worried about. So let's build a level design that ups that, tension for them, and makes it and tune it to actually force them to do something they've kind of been terrified to do. So I always appreciate, sort of, as long as it's balanced well and tuned well, I always appreciate those sorts of moments, because it's a good way to up that, your heartbeat, your heart rate level, in cool ways.
It's you're making kind of constant leaps of faith there, and there's sort of they've sort of discovered that that's kind of a mechanic that falls out of their tech, basically. Whether they designed the tech to work that way or not, whether it was an optimization or not, who knows? We don't really know at this point, but there's definitely like, oh, hey, you can definitely see the light bulb going off in the designer's head. Like, oh, you know what I could do? I can make it so you have to jump before you know that it's going to be there. And that is pretty neat. It reminds me of a level in Guacamelee, which is a modern platformer, sort of Metroidvania.
Yeah.
And it has some challenges that are optional. And one of those involves a very long series of always having to jump from where you are to where you hope a thing is going to appear. And it's challenging because you basically have to really learn where everything is and kind of come up with a plan and just get better and better and better at it.
Yeah.
That is a challenge I can't believe I beat, actually, now thinking back on it. I might not be able to do that anymore.
Well, this actually, I don't think I wrote this in my notes, but I'm remembering now one thing that I did want to mention, and this room is around this area is a good example. I think, and as we're talking about sort of like the sort of undrawing of the world once it goes below the screen, I think if you are in one of the vertically descending levels, that isn't the case. And so that, when I realized that, of course, that is an inconsistency and frustration, that because there are times in those levels where if you're going downstairs, you can fall below and the screen will scroll down to catch you if there is actually a platform already drawn there. So
Right, because it's got a sort of leading camera a little bit. So
yeah,
the camera sort of, the way that, we haven't talked about the camera a lot, but the way the camera works is that it moves in the direction of movement sort of ahead of you and then rests until you start moving in that direction again. So if you're moving down in a level, it moves. I mean, it's logically consistent in the sense that
yeah,
it's the things that are above you will have disappeared. It's just confusing because, of course, you don't care, right? Because you can't jump into those things.
yeah.
Yeah. So that's interesting.
It's
It's
technically consistent, but you're,
but it doesn't feel consistent
right, yeah, sort of like,
because it has no impact on your play when you're moving down.
yeah,
That the fact that the things are disappearing above you.
yeah,
Yeah.
your kind of lizard brain is almost is seeing an inconsistency there, right, of survival, right?
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
like, well,
Yeah.
I shouldn't jump off of the screen because there won't be anything there for me, but in this case,
Right.
there is.
Yeah.
You actually can fall. I just had this happen accidentally in one of those descending vertical levels. I fell like multiple floors and landed on just a platform, right? And kind of
And you were fine.
skipped a bunch of enemies and it was fine. Yeah. But that's like, you can't do that anywhere else. And that's like 3 levels or something, or a couple, only a handful where that's the case. So yeah, I forgot to mention that.
Yeah. No, that's a good one.
The other sort of small topic you mentioned there a couple minutes ago is the sort of combining um, combining different sort of level design mechanics that will potentially conflict with each other. And I think in these two stages, there's a couple examples. There were for me that I think are sort of like 101 examples of kind of what not to do or things to watch out for that you just have to be careful of. And as much as I think I mentioned it, or one of us mentioned it last episode, the sort of slight innovations in the stairs themselves have been interesting to me, and it's very cool that they have almost like a full rule set around stairs when it comes to jumping off of them. And then now that because I've been playing on the Switch with the Pro controller, so I actually have a D-pad now, and it definitely does make a difference. I can go backwards up things and all those sorts of things. So there's a lot of cool things going on there. But when you combine that with some of the platforming, especially the moving dynamic platforming that we were talking about earlier, jumping off of the top of stairs. So when you have the level design combine those two elements, it's very tricky because you get stuck on the top of the stairs because it enters into that stair rule set, and then it fights you. It works against what you're trying to do. So they intentionally designed areas that are really pushing how they're using stairs, which is of course one of their sort of quote unquote innovations. So you can imagine why they would do that. So it does make sense, but you just have to either change the rule set of the stairs somehow, or really be careful about combining those things. And then the other quick example was combining combat areas with things that you need to use the whip with. And so the grapple points, the area where the grapple points are going up and down on chains, moving, and then having enemies on the other side of those. There were times when you would grapple and accidentally hit one of those grapple points while you're trying to hit an enemy. And so again, you can see a cool level design decision there, but you're combining two things that are actually going to conflict with each other and frustrate the player. So something to try to avoid if you can, but or change the rule set so it's more forgiving in those cases. So those are some interesting tidbits that I was experiencing.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, what strikes me hearing you talk about that is that, these sorts of, I mean, we're saying, well, that's stuff you probably want to avoid. It may be the case that we didn't really know until seeing it that we needed to avoid it.
Right.
And even then, it's a matter of taste, really. I think probably more people, I mean, we've demonstrated with the size of games, today as an industry that more people have the taste of it being a little bit easier, obviously, right? Mario's a bigger success than Castlevania. But it is a matter of taste, and also it's sort of the tradition that sort of makes these decisions and kind of funnels us in different directions. I mean, without this without an early example like this of like, oh, okay, when you mix the rule sets like this, these things happen, and it frustrates the player, and we may want to eliminate that frustration. Without those early examples, maybe they come along later, and when games are more expensive, and and things like that. That's one nice thing about the earlier era of games, is that there's a lot more experimentation in these ways. So you might be able to pick up something from one game and go, that's really cool, but here's how I'd modify it for today, because because it feels really unforgiving, and we're gonna not hit our audience. Our audience is gonna fall off at that point in the game or whatever if we do that. But we were close,
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, that's an interesting thing, about looking back at this era.
Yeah,
is seeing that kind of variety.
Yeah, no, I feel like this podcast has been all about like sort of those little gems, right, that have just tracked through history and ended up someplace, right? Whether it was a subconscious thing or a literal thing. And just to be clear on my points about the combinations, I'm definitely for combining rule sets and mechanics like that in the level design. I'm just saying, when you find a conflict with that combination, you should try to react to it. Whether that's iterating on it, or changing the rule set or the level design or something. Because I think the instincts that they're fooling with here are actually good. It's just they created frustration sort of unnecessarily with some of these combinations, and maybe they didn't have time or resources to iterate. So that always is a is a variable to production, is always a variable to what we do. So you can't argue that. They could have just run out of time, and they just had to deal with those sorts of frustrations. But you should at least try, because I think that does make interesting moments for players.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think and I think a lot of how you iterated back in this time was that you did it with the next game.
Yeah,
There's always
that.
And because game development times were so much shorter, I think that was part of that too. Is just, well, and there was more forgiveness of this one didn't work out super well, but I think the next one will probably be fine, because you were just like learning that quickly.
That's a good point. We might have talked about this with some of the Nintendo games that we've played, but something that I don't think I'm the one that has coined this, but I bring it up a lot. I must have gotten it someplace, but I often, especially when a new Nintendo game comes out, I often bring up examples with the team, at least the designers, and talking about how in many ways Nintendo ends up shipping and polishing prototypes that they're experimenting with. And the specific example that I'll give is when we played Link to the Past, I went on and finished and played Link Between Worlds on the 3DS, which I loved, and it may be my favorite traditional structure Zelda game. But the interesting thing about that game is they're actually already experimenting with things that end up in Breath of the Wild in that game.
Interesting.
And what they ended up doing, of course, is polishing up this experimentation and making it a core element of this traditional Zelda game. And what I'm speaking to, sorry to get off topic for a bit, but what I'm speaking to specifically is the way that you gain your upgrades in that game, right? Because you can go into the store, quote unquote, and you have access to all of the ability weapons from the beginning. You just rent them. But it sort of adds in this nonlinearity that you end up seeing sort of multiplied in Breath of the Wild. And so they've always, and I think they do the same thing with Mario, right? Where they're fooling with something, and then they just end up making it a core part of the game. And then that ends up being the lesson that they've learned that they carry forward. So to your point, they are learning as they're going. They just make it the product, around that,
right,
and then ship it. Versus like, prototyping behind closed doors and then never seeing the light of day or whatever. And so there's sort of that commitment to that constant evolution. in most cases. They don't always evolve enough in some cases, but in most cases that I think is part of their success.
Yeah, and I think that and actually I don't know the timing on this, but that Skyward Sword also has that sort of.
Oh, does it? So that's one I haven't played. So yeah, so they were.
Yeah, I think that might be where that came in, but I'm actually not sure where those games are. On the timeline, and release schedule. I don't know. I don't know when they came out.
Versus Link Between Worlds.
So Link Between Worlds was 2013, and Skyward Sword was 2011. Yeah, so that was something that they also played around with in Skyward Sword.
Got it.
Yeah, I thought it was a ways ago.
Yeah, that's one of the few.
I haven't played that one either. Although I intend to. I have it. Still in the shrink wrap, of course, because that's me.
It'll happen someday.
Someday, I still have a Wii here, so got all this hardware in this house. But I have a number of games on the Wii that I need to get to one of these days. I still have GameCube games in the plastic. So,
oh geez. Well, if there's anyone who will actually follow through on that, it will be you. So.
I will. I'll get to it at some point.
But it's the funny thing about the experimentation in Castlevania for me. There's sort of the two examples we brought up that I think come up even more so in these last two stages, and the boss battles are sort of ironically the most unheroic things, and that is stairs and crouch walking. It's like they're cool, and they're adding another element to platforming combat games that haven't been there before. But still, you're like you're this amazing hero going through Dracula's castle, and you're crouch walking around very slowly and delicately around this bone boss or whatever. Right? They start forcing you to use that mechanic, and then stairs. Right. Like, yeah, I get it. It does make sense a castle would have stairs, but like, man, you really leaned into this stair thing.
Yeah.
It's like, it's not that, exciting, but it's,
right. Yeah. The gears, for example, are way more exciting, right? You're climbing up through this big clockwork with those, and then there's these hooks or the whip locations or whatever that are moving around on chains. And like, it's like, oh yeah, that's all kind of cool. But yeah, stairs are, I go upstairs every day, so I don't really consider them heroic. Often I go down them as well, about as much actually.
Yeah, but do you go up them backwards or
no? That's true.
Jump
pretty rare.
Them, or jump off of them. It's like
I do not. I take enough care of my house that I don't go drop through them. But.
Yeah, this is funny, and there's just so much to them, and it's always like as a game developer, I'm always sort of I'm running sort of production equations a little bit in my head of like how much effort would have gone into a thing,
right.
And the stairs in this game, took up a fair amount of resources for them, right? Because they had they had to get this rule set going, they had to code it, they had to art it, they had to design it, and so that was a choice, and
and you have to make it pay off in gameplay, which is why you see the later challenges with them and things like that, and maybe even the reason why you see going down them and with the camera leading you, as you mentioned, and being able to fall, just because here's another thing that we can squeeze out of the stairs that we put all this stuff in.
Yep,
so
absolutely, or the falling stairs. Right, that you mentioned, right? That's another thing of like, oh man, yeah. So now I'm combining the sticky stair thing with death. So so you can see the logic. It's just tricky.
Yeah. Final topic, and then we'll go on to feedback. Music is a thing that you've wanted to bring up for a while. You want to set that up or take it away, or just at least comment on it?
Yeah, and I was thinking about this before starting the podcast, what I wanted to say here, and I think the summary for me really comes down to MIDI of the era, I think the music that often stands out to me when we go back to the games, or even not for the podcast, if I go back to whatever Metal Gear, the original Metal Gear or something, um, I think I'm always impressed by, because MIDI lends itself really well to, in my opinion, to more sort of playful and jovial, sort of like Mario type music, you know, just because of the way that it plays from the hardware and stuff, you know, and whenever a franchise has taken that same, you know, in that same era and is doing some really excellent music in a different tone, like I've been talking about with this one, the sort of Gothic, you know, and in fact, as you mentioned, the future of the franchise, they start actually focusing the names of them around musical terms, you know, where there's sort of a musicality to the Gothic sort of castle, you know, feel to the franchise. And I actually was just surprised in this game, this early, for them to already have sort of nailed that sort of tone in the music. And I mentioned, I think last episode, a couple of specific stages that I was impressed with. But it's just very consistent and very, very good. I just think that they do a good job, and his name is escaping me, but I think he's a pretty well renowned composer these days, as far as like being one of the progenitors of really pushing the boundaries with music. And,
Yeah, it's Masanori Adachi and Taro Kudo.
yeah, I think Kudo is the one that maybe people bring up, but specifically. But anyway, like I just as I've already said, the tone of the game is something that I really appreciate, and I think the music complements it really well. And I think the game would be much lesser without it. And to hit that Gothic feel, you know, where you're chasing Dracula, you know, you want that to be there. You know, you want that to match the cathedrals and the, you know, the chandeliers and the you know, tables with white tablecloths that move and try to get you.
Yeah.
You know, it's a melodrama. You know, it's a melodramatic space, and I think they just do a lot with the medium in a time when music is very tricky to get that feel across.
Yeah, so the couple things. I mean, one, yeah, definitely I love the sort of organ feel of it, even if it doesn't always sound like an organ. It often sounds like organ music, if you know what I mean, even if it's not using organ instrumentation. But the other thing is that, and this is a weird thing, the audio chip on this thing is an 8-bit CPU that actually runs faster because it has to match the TV refresh rate. And it outputs stereo. It's completely separate from, like, it's completely separate from the rest of the system, apparently. So you have to, like, put stuff in a little command buffer, I guess, basically to tell it, okay, you're going to have to play this frame or whatever. It's not like you just do play sound, you know, whatever. It's kind of a different, because it's a separate. Yeah, it looks like it was kind of a challenge.
Yeah,
to program for. I love looking up hardware like this and being like, what?
Yeah.
Another
you know, layer.
The PlayStation 2 had that to a certain degree as well, because you had the IOP, but yeah. Anyway,
I don't know.
But it had some interesting digital signal processing on it. It could do echo, sort of a reverb, I guess you'd call it. Yeah, pretty neat stuff.
Yeah, I don't know why.
8 channels.
I think it's because I'm not, you know, a musical person myself, or I don't play music, you know, and so it's definitely a mysterious sort of medium for me. But for whatever reason, the music of this era, working with that hardware, and or like you said, with the extra difficulties of how they're actually just implementing the hardware, it's just always just amazing to me when people, especially Nintendo specifically, because so much of their music of this time and even the NES is just very memorable, you know. So they just hit it out of the park. We have the, you know, their themes are like the Star Wars themes, right, for games in many ways that people can hum. But they're working with so little, you know. And of course, graphically, same case. So I know that inherently, but for whatever reason, I think because music is just so much more mysterious to me, the fact that they get so much out of so little and then deal with these challenges that you're talking about with the hardware is just always so impressive to me. So and they're still nailing it, and I think this game is definitely worthy of that praise.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the audio all around, the audio is quite good, but the music in particular I think stands out as far as the audio goes. Not not every track is a winner, but I think most of them are quite good, and it's been actually kind of challenging to pick what audio to use as part of the podcast, just because it's like, I like several of these.
Yeah.
But I definitely like the feel of a lot of the music, and it's often quite propulsive when you're going into something that's kind of challenging. It kind of feels like it's got the same rhythms that you have, like your heart's going up, so it's the music's taken up a notch as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So
yeah.
All
right. Super
cool game.
Castlevania IV. Who knew?
Not beaten by either of us.
Is this a first?
Unlikely to be.
I guess XCOM. We didn't technically.
No, neither. Yeah, neither one of us finished XCOM. I always have to think what games did we both? Yeah, I don't know. No, that might be the only other one that we've won.
Yeah, you've done better.
I generally beat everything we play, but not always. Not always.
I think we're making a good call in this case. I think it's fine.
I mean, I don't think we had anything more to learn from the game.
We can justify it
at that point.
Way. That's fine.
Yeah. No, I don't. I can't imagine. On a technicality, I beat GTA 3, but I used a cheat.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's one I didn't finish. Yeah, I just ran out of time.
But that might be the only other. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Looking back through, I think that's the only other one. But Anyway, so we're gonna keep playing Castlevania. As we said, we're gonna hold off on takeaways, because I think some of our biggest takeaways from the arcade title are going to still be true of Castlevania Symphony of the Night, which I'm not sure whether we'll play all of it. Make sure you check the Twitter feed if you're playing along. I'm going to be playing it on the PS3. It's a PS1 classic there, and I think that's basically emulated on the PS3. I don't actually know how the PS1 classics work on the PS3. I hope it's okay. Yeah, I think it is too, because it downloaded to my machine, which is not what Soul Reaver, I don't think, did that, and it was not good. Could be wrong. We shall see. Don't know what that's going to be like. But I hope it's good. If it's terrible, we probably won't play a ton of it. But I think that's supposed to be a pretty good version. I think people were pretty happy when that became available. So yeah, I'm looking forward to playing more of that. We haven't done the research yet as to how far we're going to play. I have no sense of how big that game is, but I know that is a particularly beloved, all-time best on system type title.
Mm-hmm. I feel like
it's like that, and Metal Gear Solid, and a handful of other PlayStation games that are just like, oh, these are the ones. Final Fantasy VII,
mm-hmm.
Resident Evil. So yeah, it'll be interesting to play, since we've played some great PlayStation 1 games as well. It'd be nice to add another one to the list.
Well, and it's 2D as well, right? So it'll be a PlayStation 1 game that we'll be playing that is not polygonal. So that'll be interesting to kind of compare to. But I feel like when people talk about, I think it's good that we played the SNES version of Castlevania, but I feel like when people talk about the franchise, Symphony of the Night is the one that comes up the most, as like the pinnacle of at least the 2D versions. So
yeah, I would agree. So yeah, I look forward to it. Although I know the GBA and DS titles are also well regarded, and I think they're all in the sort of style of Symphony of the Night as well. So
Right.
having played one of those, I think that's I definitely look forward to playing more. I'm trying to, it's been a number of years, so I'm not sure I remember exactly sort of what the design aesthetics were. There's definitely the sub weapons; those continue on, but I don't remember as far as like, do you gain more skills? I really can't remember, or if it's all just sort of platforming, but now you can get more places just as you go further. And so I really don't, I don't remember how that works. So anyway, that will be what we do next week, and maybe for a couple weeks following.
Yeah. Sounds good.
All right, well, let's move on to feedback then. We actually got a review this time from it's a very good name. We love to get those reviews through the podcast, whatever podcast catcher you use. If your infrastructure allows such a thing, it would be great to have your reviews. If we don't read them on the cast, it might be because I haven't seen it. So just shoot me an email at devgameclub@gmail.com. Why don't you go ahead there, sir?
Okay. The subject of the review is knowledgeable, insightful, and fun from Hadruken.
Good. I was wondering if you would do it. Yeah.
This just blew everyone's ears out as we've gotten criticism of the equalization. Maybe Brett will handle that later. And here we go. I came to this podcast after it was recommended on another DLC, and I was immediately engaged. At first, I only listened to episodes covering games I had played or was interested in, but thanks to the hosts, I now listen to every episode, even if it's about a game I'm not interested in or a genre I don't particularly care for. It's always rewarding to hear Brett and Tim apply their knowledge and insight to both the technical and artistic aspects of each title, and every episode is sure to have something interesting or enlightening to learn about why some aspects of that game is the way that it is, be it experimentation with then new technologies, a novel way to overcome a technical limitation, or something else entirely. If there's a negative, it's that audio quality on early episodes leaves something to be desired, but it's by no means unlistenable, and the content absolutely makes it worth the trouble. Later episodes are not affected. Well, thank you.
That is true. I've gotten better over time.
Yeah, I actually haven't gone. People mention that enough that I've been meaning to go back and listen to how bad the early episodes were.
The first 4 especially were bad. Unfortunately, I think I was just recording straight from Skype. But
right. Yeah, unfortunately, that was our Ken Levine, stuff too, right? So it's a bummer that we can't fix that. But those
I
are
should
good
look
episodes.
sometime.
Yeah.
Maybe one of these months I'll try to pass it through this new filtering software I'm using to clean it up a little bit. But there's only so much you can do with the sources.
Yeah, it's part of our history, right? We got to have
That's
some
true.
of that. Yeah, thank you, Hadruken. That's very nice. And DLC is one of my favorites, so it's nice to know that the recommendation came from one of my favorite podcasts, Kanata and Spicer.
Yeah, I know you listen to that one all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I don't, because they mispronounce my name. So
that's probably my fault.
It probably is.
Hey guys, guess what? Say
me.
his name this way. He's gonna love it.
Jesus. Okay, so we actually Drew is a double dip this week. He also sent an email.
Oh, nice.
With a singing review.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
Have you seen it?
No, you mentioned.
No, just that I mentioned it. Yeah, to you. Yeah. And I think you'll know this one.
Okay.
Geez, this it's long too, so it's just like I got to get myself in the headspace, and I can't sing it entirely at the rate that it's when it was performed, because it has a lot of gaps. It would just. There'd be a lot of me just pausing and not singing because there's like long gaps.
Oh, okay. All right.
Okay. Before I start, though, I just want to say, I'd like to dedicate this song to my father.
Oh.
It's a song the girls in the band love, Lisa and Wendy. Okay. I don't want to tell you what to do. I'm not your dad, so you do you. I only think you'll learn more if you take my advice, so you should listen to Tim and Brett talking in the Dev Game Club. Dev Game Club. Dev Game Club. Knowledge gain, games explain. Insight laughs, history more is what you'll get from Tim and Brett talking in Dev Game Club. I never thought I'd care about Pokemon Blue. I only wanted to know about God of War. Link, Eco, the Wasteland, and the Freeman. It's such a shame each episode has to end. Dev Game Club, Dev Game Club. Knowledge gained, games explained. Insight laughs, history more is what you'll get from Tim and Brett talking in Dev Game Clubs. Folks, I know that games are changing. Sometimes we all reach out for something new, that me and you two. You think this one's the innovator, but Brett and Tim teach you how they evolved. You'll appreciate now more after you learn about then, thanks to Dev Game Club. Dev Game Club, Dev Game Club. Experience distilled, secrets spilled. Lots to learn, for more you'll yearn. So please go listen to Brett and Tim chatting in the Dev Game Club. Come on, crowd. No more? Okay, thancfully that's all.
Wow, that might be your pinnacle. That was some good stuff there. You even did the bridge, or he as well. Wrote the bridge.
Wrote the bridge. Yeah.
Oh my God, it's on the tip of my tongue. I know.
How do you not know?
No, I do know it. I'm having a blank on the actual. Because you did such a good job with those lyrics, I can't remember.
There's a color in the title.
Oh my God, it's right on the.
It's a movie.
It's a movie. No, I know. No, you nailed you nailed the melody. I totally know the song. I just can't. I'm blanking.
He died 3 years ago.
Purple Rain.
Yes.
Oh, that's right. Yes. Oh my gosh. I gotta get Jen to listen to that.
It's tough because there's a lot of it's a very slow ballad with a lot of gaps.
Yeah. No, you nailed it. You did.
I had to speed it up.
You did a great job. Yeah. Jen's a big Prince fan, so I'll have to.
Oh, as am I.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. Oh man.
Oh yeah, he's definitely one of my first musical sort of. I was listening from his first album,
yeah,
which came out in 79.
Oh my goodness!
I mean, I didn't hear it in 79. I was starting to listen to him in 81, 82 or whatever.
Wow. But, well, you two have something
still quite young.
Important in common then, because she was obsessed and is obsessed. So there's sorry, now we're doing this on air, but when you're here, there's a Prince exhibit in
at the Experimental Music Project.
Yeah, well, it's now just called the Museum of Pop Culture, but yeah, same place. Yeah, they have a special exhibit because Paul
that's
Allen
a great
had
building.
That's
a Geary building, I think, right? It's one of those big titanium structures.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Good job. I knew it. It was just on the tip of my tongue. Yeah. And also his lyrics were quite good.
They are pretty good.
Clever little tidbits in there. It's like a Easter egg or a song full of Easter eggs for the podcast.
That's true. Yeah, quite a number of the games we played too. So, quite well done. Quite well done. Thank you, Drew from Scotland.
Excellent.
Excellent. Yep. All right. Enough of that. Let's move on to the last one. A fairly quick one, but has a question in it from Logan Brown.
Okay. This is an email. Subject: emulation question from Logan Brown. Hey, Brett and Tim and Brett. You've mentioned emulation a few times over the years, and again with Castlevania IV and save states. And I was curious about your thoughts on how emulation affects the experience of retro games. I've been researching emulation for a while, and I've found that while it's easy to say that emulation definitely changes something about play, it's surprisingly difficult to articulate that something. Maybe because emulators open up possibilities in a game rather than definitively altering it. Thanks for the great work you guys do on the pod, Logan. Yeah, I cannot speak to this at all.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, there's a number of things. I mean, some of it has come up, here.
Oh, yeah. I guess I was kind of thinking technical, but you're just saying in general.
Oh, no, I don't think necessarily the technical. I think he's talking about just how it affects play
Totally
more than anything else. One thing is that I was actually thinking about this morning. I'm playing this on even though it's corrected for ratio. I'm playing it on a widescreen TV that's quite a bit larger than anything I would have had in the early 90s or whatever. Yeah. So there's things like that are just big, huge differences just in pure experience. I mean, I still have an old TV, but the SNES Classic doesn't even put a signal that would go to it. And display is, I think, a huge difference often in things like that, because it just does not. Like, I mean, one reason I always joke that I keep the TV around for the old TV is that it has actual black, right? I mean, that they just, nothing is drawn if a thing is black on an old TV, whereas that's not really the case with an HD television. And I don't want to go into that. It's just a whole big can of worms. But, the screen's curved, and there's weird effects that just come from it being scanline technology. And I mean, there's just, and right. So with just the display, there's big differences often, especially if you're playing on monitors and all of that. And then of course, on top of that, you have the issues of, being able to do things like save the game anywhere you want, and things like that, which work directly against the original design. I think to our benefit in this game's case, but maybe not always. I'm sure there are games where it would be trivial, right? I mean, it enables things like tool-assisted speedruns as well, which is kind of fun, where people are exploring the literal, like, pure limits of what the game can actually do, because they can explicitly schedule an exact half button press or whatever on a particular frame or something like that. But anyway, your thoughts?
Yeah, some similar ones. I think the one that always comes to my mind with emulation, that's maybe a little bit about play, but again, kind of going back to sort of the aesthetic side of it, and it is the display, as you mentioned. I kind of equate it to watching a standard def old TV show on an HD TV, where, and one example, though, they've done some remasters where they've sort of tried to, I guess, fix or improve upon it. But the original Star Trek show, TV show, the original series is a good example of where, they're playing to the medium or the sort of the output that they had at the time, right? So there's a lot of, and so when you're watching those old shows on an HD TV, you're seeing things that you're just not intended to see, right? They never imagined that they would have such an output. And with some of these older games, especially the pixel-based games, that playing it with the scan line, playing it with on those tube TVs or what have you. That was part of it. That was part of the aesthetic and the feel of it, right? And there, a lot of the emulations trying to simulate that in certain ways, right? And some of the collections really do a pretty good job of doing that. But I just feel like I've never found an emulation mode where they've done a filter or something that feels like it did back then. There's just something about playing it on that fuzzy, blurry almost, right? Display that changes the feel of it for me. And I've actually, since we started doing the podcast, I probably mentioned this before, because I'm starting to reacquire all the old consoles. And when I can, I'm trying to play on the original console. Sometimes much to my chagrin, I'd rather have the save state. But I've half contemplated getting a old CRT too, because I miss that. When I'm playing these older games for some reason. And maybe it's just nostalgia for me because I played them on those games or on those TVs. but I do think it impacts the way that the game feels, for sure. The other one that's a little bit less maybe of an issue, because there's so many good solutions to it, but I also think the controller is a big deal for emulation. Like there's so much about a game's design, especially for console games and especially for Nintendo games, where they are designing for the controller that they have in many ways. We talked about it with Mario 64 quite a bit. And I think you want to, if you are emulating, I think you want to try to simulate as close as you can the way that the player was playing the game on the controller itself, the input. So I guess I'm talking about output and input, but because and I think I talked about it with Castlevania specifically, because I have 2 sessions playing on an analog stick on the Switch and then 1 session playing on an actual better D-pad, and the game was definitely way different. And with emulation, there's so many ways you can play on your PC, you can play whatever, right? So there's a lot of ways to not play with the original hardware, inputs. And so I don't know, those are the ones that come to mind for me.
Yeah. On the technical side, it's interesting. Whenever I've thought about emulation, just like, oh, would that be a fun side project? Often I come down on, I don't have time for that. But I mean, there's things that you have to keep in mind. Like, I'm trying to emulate this hardware, which ran at a specific clock rate, which maybe doesn't completely match up, with what I'm on. Hopefully I'm so far, divorced from, having anywhere near that. Like if you're emulating something like an NES or something of that era, our machines are so much faster. I'm sure we could pretty precisely emulate that. But, there's things like instruction sets, to execute an actual instruction on those architectures. Different instructions take different amounts of time. Like a divide is much longer than an add. Usually an add is a 1 cycle thing, and then something like a multiply on those machines might be anywhere from 4 to 7 cycles, and then divides are usually somewhere in the 20s. And so you have to always keep that in mind too. It's like that you're going at a fixed clock rate, but we could execute instructions so much faster now. You have to actually keep in mind, like, I'm doing this thing, and I have to keep that sort of scheduled with something like the SNES, where you've got this separate sound chip. Like, I have to keep track of like exactly where the audio is going to be, at that point as well. So there's all kinds of concerns like that to kind of keep in mind when you're emulating. It's like it's a big scheduling problem of like how long each thing takes and what it actually does and what it actually accomplishes. Because if you don't get those right, you'll have things that are different. I do think just the analog nature of televisions, older televisions, has its own feel. It feels warmer.
It's like,
I guess I would say
it's almost like records, right? Records versus vinyl versus digital or anything else. Yeah, which is also an age-old debate for music files. So it's oh man, that's the sort of what you were just saying about all of the the cycles and the math behind it. I'm just like, man, that's mystifying to me. Wasn't Andrew a big emulator guy? Didn't he?
Oh, he loved to play emulate. He didn't work on any emulation that I know of, but he and his brother were both kind of into MAME.
Got it. Okay.
MAME, they typically had. I think he actually took his PS2. There was you could buy a Linux thing for PS2. I don't remember the details, but there was like some add-on you could buy, and he just made it. He turned his PS2 into a MAME machine back in the day, and he just had thousands of games on it.
Got it. I thought he had done some coding for emulated games.
No, I don't think so. Maybe for a front end or something like that, but I don't think he actually did any emulation. It's tough. I mean, even just like there's the whole issue of like, okay, well, different instructions take different amounts of time. I mean, hopefully you can find a manual, right? To do that. And then there's always problems with some games doing things that are not documented, that were not ever publicly documented. And I think one of the Metal Gears. I think somebody's written in about this before, but one of the Metal Gears, like 3 or 4, is considered to be not emulatable because they had some access to some hardware that's not been documented, to some hardware feature that's not been documented elsewhere.
Whoa. So it was later 3 or 4, really?
Yeah, it was one of those, I think, and I'd have to go and kind of search the mail, but yeah, but that's or maybe it was a Twitter thread or something like that. But yeah, it was I think it might have even been 4. So it might have, oh yeah, I think it was this PS3 emulation. It was Metal Gear Solid 4. I just looked that up while we were talking. Yeah, so it's just yeah, it's just amazing, like some of the things that are just difficult to do because there's no paper trail to whatever they're doing, and they're doing stuff there with Metal Gear Solid 4 that you were explicitly forbidden to do, but that the OS was capable of. It wasn't really a hardware thing. I kind of misspoke on that. I forgot the details. But yeah, I mean, basically they didn't want to have you to be able to load in different sections of code. That was supposed to be forbidden, and they basically allowed them to do it. It must ship with its own specific libraries for the OS. It's kind of amazing to even consider.
That sounds like them.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Because they knew that's a system seller, they let that go through, but it does hamper later efforts.
Yeah.
Anyway, so there's a million questions like that, and emulation's only going to get, in some ways, only going to get harder because once consoles were connected to the internet, they could be updated. So it's like, well, what version of the operating system are you running on, right? And things like that. And then beyond that, the other aspect though is that in some sense it gets easier because the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One are effectively PCs. I mean, they have some specific graphics hardware, but that'll all that stuff will be in consumer stuff in 10 years or whatever, so it won't necessarily be a thing. The PS4 is probably a little trickier that way. So anyway, yeah, I could go on and on about the technical issues with emulation, but I think the feel is a big part of it, and not playing on a TV, a CRT I should say, is a big thing because of its just its feel, just the warmth and the weird artifacts and whatever. And every TV was different too, so it was a very personal experience as well, in a way that monitors are not. So
yeah.
Oh, the other thing about television, you had mentioned the Star Trek, all those back in the day, shows were filmed on 35 millimeter film, and that's partly why there's more information available.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point
when you remaster them or whatever. Yeah. So and I wanted to call out the original Batman series in particular because between its production design and I think who they had behind the camera, it's been lauded as one of those just visually underappreciated gems that had a Blu-ray edition a few years ago that apparently just looks amazing.
Oh, cool.
Have not seen it myself.
Okay, I'll have to look for that. That's I'm a Batman fan.
There you go. We could
watch those.
Watch that together when I'm there.
That'd be fun. Yeah, because I watched those as a kid live.
Yeah.
Well, maybe that wasn't live. Maybe it must have been. I'm not that old.
It would have been reruns. Yeah. No.
I'm not as old as
quite
you.
that old.
Yeah.
No.
But actually, probably a better analogy for my point would be maybe like the '80s sitcoms where they started to use video, right? But CRTs
exactly.
were still happening. But then like just something simple like makeup, right? Like. They did makeup totally differently in that era, and so it just doesn't work for HD.
Yeah. No, it's a good point. Yeah, and HD definitely requires different things, and The Wire is a television show which famously was shot in 4:3, entirely in 4:3 for the first like 3 seasons, and then the last 2 seasons were filmed in HD, and the creators have kind of fought against there being a widescreen version of the original shows because no, we framed it that way. Why would you?
Yeah, that's
what would you do?
Great
you can't just add that.
Yeah.
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 So anyway, it's kind of easier to talk about TV and stuff like that because you can literally visually compare it. But there's a lot of feel stuff when it comes to games, because of our, the player's part in the game. And that makes it a little bit harder to even sort of talk about. So I understand why Logan says it's difficult to articulate because it's feel stuff and we don't necessarily have good words for feel because it's not, you just can't.
Yeah.
We just don't have the terms and it's not as easily quantifiable. So,
yeah.
Which is also just kind of interesting. Okay. Whew, that was a long-winded feedback section. We need to let you get off and get out to the trail.
Yes, I'm going to be going to the wilderness.
And yes, don't get lost. I don't know if there's anywhere in North America you can get entirely lost. I guess you can.
Oh yeah, happens all the time actually.
Not I suppose.
But, yes.
Oh sure. Oh, here we go.
No, I just don't. I just don't go on adventures where that might happen. But yeah.
It's very responsible of you. All right. Well, next week then, we're going to put Super Castlevania IV to bed here. We're going to put a stake in it. And we're going to move on to Symphony of the Night for next week. Like I said, we'll be on Twitter telling you where to play to. I will try to look that up before the end of the week so that you can have the weekend to do that.
We almost
you'll find that at
without the stake joke.
But,
but right at the very end, you slipped it in. Nice. Very good.
I did. I didn't.
Good work.
I felt like it was a joke that hadn't really been entirely defanged, and so I needed to.
All right. I shouldn't have interrupted you. We can continue.
Yeah. Anyway, you'll be able to find that information on Twitter at DevGameClub, where you can also find my co-host at
Tim Longo Jr. with the JR at the end.
I am not much on Twitter these days myself, but you can find me most nights streaming at twitch.tv/Brett Duville. I've been playing, of course, Super Castlevania IV, but also I am now playing Dragon's Dogma.
I saw that.
So,
yeah.
Yes. I tried to play Myst 4, but the game is crashing on me. I dabbled in a couple of other things, but now I'm into a big old JRPG, so action JRPG. So you can find me playing that most weeknights. And of course, on the weekends, I play whatever the podcast is playing. Thanks so much for joining us this week, and good morning.
Good morning.